Difference between supply demand theory and law of diminishing marginal utility. Look at this graphic representation. What is supply and demand theory? Supply and demand theory analyze the relationship between the quantity of goods or services that producers are willing to sell and the quantity that consumers are willing to buy at various prices, ultimately determining market equilibrium. Law of diminishing marginal utility means the law of diminishing marginal utility states that as a person consumes additional units of goods or services, the added satisfaction means utility gain from each additional unit decreases. Differences. On scope concern, supply and demand theory, broad market analysis, but law of diminishing marginal utility, individual consumer behavior. To focus, supply and demand theory, market prices and quantities, law of diminishing marginal utility, consumer satisfaction. Three key variables, supply and demand theory concern price, quantity supplied, quantity demanded. But law of diminishing marginal utility, utility quantity consumed. For market impact, supply and demand theory determines the market equilibrium. Law of diminishing marginal utility influences consumer purchasing decisions. 5 graph representation, supply and demand theory, supply and demand curves, law of diminishing marginal utility, utility curve. Six equilibrium, supply and demand theory point where supply equals demand. Law of diminishing marginal utility does not directly determine market equilibrium. 7 pricing influence, supply and demand theory, price determined by market forces. But law of diminishing marginal utility, price related to individual utility gained. 8 consumer behavior, supply and demand theory generalized across market. Law of diminishing marginal utility specific to individual consumers. 9 supply side, supply and demand theory include supply considerations. Law of diminishing marginal utility focus supply on demand side. 10 application, supply and demand theory used in market analysis and policy. Law of diminishing marginal utility used in consumer choice theory. 11 mathematical formulation, supply and demand theory, quantitative methods, supply demand equations. Law of diminishing marginal utility, utility functions. 12 tempered aspect, supply and demand theory, states or dynamic market analysis. Law of diminishing marginal utility, static utility analysis. 13 assumptions, supply and demand theory, rational behavior certain probes other things being equal. Law of diminishing marginal utility, decreasing additional satisfaction. 14. Complexity. Supply and demand theory more complex, involves multiple factors. Law of diminishing marginal utility simpler, single factor focus. 15. Utility measurement. Supply and demand theory implicit in price and quantity. Law of diminishing marginal utility explicit in consumer satisfaction. Thank you. Have a nice day.